A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night confronted audiences in its initial 2014 release and continues to do so in present day. Although advertised as Western and vampire genre blend, additional genres are blended, such as gangster, neorealist, comedic, feminist, and noir, categorizing the movie as an ovni film, meaning UFO in French. The blending of this large scope of genre is evident throughout the film, and serves as an innovative tool to point towards issues of sex and power in Iran. Film form and narrative harmonizes with the contemporary factor of Iranian women wishing to vocalize about social political concerns. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night was directed by Annie Lily Amirpour, who grew up in America, exemplifying how Iranian women situated from outside of Iran can utilize freedoms from restrictions and easy access to film equipment to express opinions about sexual power relations which would otherwise be banned under Ayatollah rule within Iran. In the following extract and the film as a whole, we will discuss how the film plays with genre conventions to create a fresh perspective, highlighting issues of gender and power in Iran. Due to the nature of this movie blending many genres, this also means that the film can be analyzed and interpreted in several ways. We will first analyze the film uses and plays with genre through a Western lens, followed by vampire, ending with gangster/film noir. Finally, we will analyze the film through the lens of how traditional perceptions of the gangster genre is blended with film noir and a feminist plot. The film elements are rich with political meaning and serve as a function to discuss issues of Iranian politics, with the overall vision to reframe women as strong persons. Gangster films typically portray men as being powerful leaders, with an abundance of money, sex, and drugs, who rule with fear. Saeed the Pimp is a gangster that terrorizes others, including a Rash, who he takes a car from to pay for a drug debt, and Addie the prostitute, who he refuses to pay and instead sexualizes her to prove her inequality. These acts solidify his role as a criminal who wields power over others. For the character Saeed the Pimp, there are many symbols and props used to show his status as a strong gangster leader. The most obvious symbol is seen as blatantly tattooing sex across his chest as a proclamation of power, showing how men in Iran can be openly sexual as opposed to women who are expected to conceal notions of sexuality in the public eye. The gangster iconography in the setting of Saeed the Pimp's house reflects the idea of dominant male powers, with props and symbols displayed that are typically tied to notions of power seen in 1970s cinema. These include mounted deer heads, guns, drugs, a suitcase full of money, and big cats, such as chain, furs, posters, jacket, tattoos. This saturation of big cat imagery further symbolizes how Saeed the Pimp is a predator. Portraying Saeed the Pimp as a 70s villain links to the notion that men were placed in unfair positions of power during the 1979 revolution led by Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. However, certain details which do not typically apply to a gangster film have been incorporated to bring the gangster style to the modern age, such as Saeed the Pimp wearing a tracksuit as opposed to a 1970s suit. In addition, the music which he plays is electronic, which is not something that you would expect from a typical gangster movie character. This makes the film feel more relevant in its discussion of contemporary gender politics, as the character reflects contemporary trends. The feminist perspective is realized by framing a female protagonist as a dark and powerful character, whose actions are motivated by serving justice to men who have performed heinous acts against women. Her role as a morally ambiguous vampire who uses murder as an anti-hero fashion is iconic of the dark expressions of film noir and serves the underlying feminist theme. Before the vampire goes out to protect the bad city, you are invited to watch her dance alone in her room to a modern soundtrack of modern electronic music. Free to express herself through her body. This flips global perceptions of subservient Iranian women following traditionalist ideals imposed by the Ayatollah, and reframes us to view the vampire and subsequently Iranian women as contemporary figures. The black and white color choice used throughout the film reminds us of film noir, where women are usually portrayed as helpless roles. But in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, this color grading is used to give power to the female vampire character. She stalks the streets in darkness, wearing dark makeup and concealed by a black coat as she follows villainous men. By utilizing black and white color grading and repeating the pattern of her stalking men throughout the film, we understand that the entire film follows this disposition. Dark contrast lighting follows the film noir aesthetic, but adds to the film's expression of reverse power roles. The female vampire is shrouded in dark contrast as she moves through the space, surveying the streets and the perimeter of Saeed the Pimp's room. Much like a typical film noir movie, the film utilizes the editing process of long cuts. This provides a sense of tension as our eyes wander between the characters, knowing that either one could be in imminent danger. Saeed the Pimp is placed in the center of the room and the camera frame. This mirrors the idea that men are self-placed into a position of importance in Iran. He then lifts weights before he moves across the room to dance provocatively at the vampire. The act of weightlifting paired with dancing with his undone shirt is a further display of male power, revealing his body and performing his strength and sexuality to show his dominance. However, during this act, he is situated beneath the vampire, forced to look up at her using an upward camera angle as she looks down on him with a downward camera angle. In the fashion of film noir, her face is now underlit. This infers that she is in fact the powerful character and the decider of how this act will end. The vampire responds by turning sex against Saeed the Pimp, reclaiming sex and power through an act in which he used to humiliate and disempower Addie the prostitute earlier in the film. At this moment, the electronic music that was used to indicate power for the contemporary pimp shifts back to noir, taking the power away from him and giving it back to the female vampire. The vampire's face is shown in a medium close-up to show what would be considered an intimate act. However, the noir soundtrack acts to alert us that it is in fact a dark and sinister moment. This is all performed while wearing her chador, which is usually perceived by Westerners as an oppressive symbol, but the vampire reclaims her power by performatively wearing it like a superhero cloak, transforming us to see her as a feminist hero. As the vampire leaves the apartment, she passes a Rash, who is adorned in his 1950s leather jacket and quiff. She does not perceive a Rash as a threat, as he is viewed through the lens of 1950s freedom, with liberation and resistance against the regime emerging after 1953. He is symbolic of a time where women were granted freedoms before the political revolution of Iran in 1979. A Rash further functions as a symbol of American freedom felt by director Anna Lily Amirpour. This symptomatic meaning derived from the trends of the 1950s is further imbued in symbolism carried throughout the film by use of props such as his vintage car and hamburgers, by use of landscapes such as the desert and factories, and by use of musical reference. The scene ends with the camera holding the shot still as the characters are separated by bars, looking at each other wistfully. This is a visual representation of her longing for political freedom for Iran outside of the prison state laws. In conclusion, A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is an example of how a director can blend film genres to create new meanings. By changing our expectation of film genres and twisting them into a feminist perspective, director Anna Lily Amirpour invites the audience to consider issues of gender and politics in contemporary Iran. By analyzing the movie through its film elements, we can see that the film can be interpreted in several different ways. However, the overall underlying theme is the elevation of women's voices and perspectives.